So I'm gonna start recording. All right, cool. So one of my favorite modules is communication, because I think if no matter how good we are, if we can't communicate our brilliance, it does not matter. We have to be able to get to a point where the knowledge that we have in our head, we can communicate that in a way that the family can understand. And you see this a lot with physicians who are super smart, but have difficulty um, breaking that down to an eighth grade level and communicating in a way that's effective. You see physicians that are super effective can communicate very challenging medical concepts in a way that anybody can understand. And if you think of the physicians with good bedside manner or ones that you enjoy going to see, you know that they have this way of communicating that makes sense to you. Same thing with nurses that are successful in palliative care, chaplains, social workers, CNAs, uh, marketing team, administrators, everybody that works in hospice and palliative care, you're successful if you can communicate. And so when you look at communication, the bigger part of communication is listening. So um, a dude back in ancient Greeks said, nature gave us one tongue and two ears so we could hear twice as much as we speak. And I love to listen. I love to listen to the room, listen to the people that are talking, so that when I do need to say something, I can relate it to those that are there and be able to be intelligent when I'm talking and purposeful. So with palliative care, the number one requirement is that we can communicate with our families, with our patients effectively, and hopefully that bleeds on to the rest of our team. Um, so when we look at the terminal illness that we all deal with every day, I think we all remember that it's a family situation. Um, that we don't just take care of the patient, we don't take care of the heart failure, we don't just take care of the cancer, we take care of the whole person, and that whole person involves their whole family circle. And getting that understanding what the family circle is vital into providing expert palliative care. So when we look at communication needs of the patient, we look at the need for information, their ability to disclose feelings, maintaining a sense of control. Most of the problems we have and issues that we have circle around control. Who has control? I've seen great, brilliant nurses fail because they need control. They need to control the environment. And that comes across to the family as, you don't care about us. All you want to do is tell us what to do. So we have to understand that the family is the one that needs control, and we have to give them ways of doing that. Sometimes at the end of life, we need to find, well, not sometimes, at the end of life, we need to find meaning in what we did. And so allowing them to process that meaning and how it's effective for them. For the family, they also need information and they need permission to speak. And then they also need to be listened to. So being able to circle that around, where family and patient are all able to get the information they need and be able to process it correctly. When you, as a new hospice nurse, when you walk into a room and you see somebody that has 20 different family members and they're all in a 200 square foot room and they're all looking at you, expecting you to say the right things, that can be extremely intimidating. And I think I can think of a handful of times when nurses in the room right now have had that experience, which is why I always, when I know that's coming, I always bring a social worker with me, or a chaplain in the right situations. But one person can't do it all. We got to work as a team when it comes to making sure that we hit all these communication areas. So biggest barriers, obviously the fear of what's coming. I just had this conversation twice yesterday with family members that are in the earlier stages of Alzheimer's disease. And one of the families is very, they're just go-getters, right? No matter, they get everything done, they know how to do it, they get it done, and they feel like they're failing because they don't know what to do right now. They don't know how to interact with their father in a way that is, we talk about therapeutic lies, right? They feel like they're failing because they can't help him move past the delusion or, uh, you know, a thought process of people are in the house, or I got to go do something, or I'm going to go drive my truck, and they can't deflect him, and they feel like failures. So one of my biggest part was, look, you haven't done this before. You've never experienced Alzheimer's disease before, and it's going to be harder than you think it is. I'll just give you that up front. So give yourself some grace and let's work through it. The other family is 3 or 4 years in advance, and we're starting to talk about, we got maybe 18 months left, maybe 2 years left. And what does that look like? Talk about broken hips, wounds, all that stuff. So they're further in, but still every day is a new day. Every day is challenging. Every day is a new experience. So we have to be that guide in the experience module, because when we're talking to somebody who is dying and their family, that's the first time they've lost their mom or their dad. That's the first time that they've lost a son or a daughter. And we have to be able to be that guide as this is okay, this is normal. And sometimes when it's not normal, we got to be there to fix everything that we can. So avoidance of emotions, stoicism is something that comes out a lot in hospice and palliative care, and being able to work through that stoicism can be hard sometimes. You might find that sometimes healthcare providers can be insensitive. And if we're not promoting the right time of our rate of our speech, our volume, if we're not doing that just right, it can come across as insensitive, even though that's not our intent. And when you look at families or patient or healthcare community, we see sometimes as hospice as a failure, and then there's a sense of guilt that I can't do it. And we see that a lot coming with the lack of experience that transitions to that sense of guilt towards the end. So when we look at barriers to our communication, there's a fear of us not knowing the answer to the problem. So as a new hospice nurse or a new nurse or a new hospice chaplain or social worker, there's a fear that we don't communicate because we don't know the exact right answer to give. And that just comes with experience. It comes with knowledge, it comes with experience. Charlie gave an example of to Mary of a Korean War veteran 2 or 3 days ago that he was able to relate to better because he had a little bit of that knowledge from the veteran class last week. He was able to take that knowledge and say, oh, this happened, I get it. And so being able to gather as much knowledge as we can is a big piece of that. We always got families that are going to disagree with our recommendations. I try to step back and just say, you are in charge. These are our options, and these are the outcomes of those options. Regardless of what we choose, I'm going to be here to help you. From a healthcare provider, lack of understanding of the culture or the culture and those goals can be challenging. I make fun of, I'm from backwoods Utah, but I didn't get a lot of varying cultures. I grew up on a reservation, so I had the native culture and I had my redneck culture, and I didn't really have much experience outside of that. I was actually, as I was thinking about this class, and last week's class, when I came out of the Army, trying to be alpha male and surrounded by a bunch of go-getters, come back to be a CNA in a nursing home. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I ever met a gay person before I worked in the nursing home. But my leader and one of my main coworkers saw my discomfort with that, and it was comical, but they helped me work through this. Not even sure what the right terminology is anymore, but I was uncomfortable, but they got me past that, and still some of my best friends, because I didn't understand the culture. So understanding the culture, having that life experience is going to help us get better. Our own personal grief issues. Um, I told you last week about the nurse with the Celtic chanting. Um, that was her own grief issue coming out. And again, in hospice, it's easy to allow past emotional things to bleed into your practice. So being able to, as we say, turn your home life off at the door and turn your work life off as you leave the door. So try to make that barrier is going to be helpful. So I love the myths. So communication is deliberate, right? We communicate when we are not consciously aware of communicating. And I love being in the room during this comment because I call you guys out on your body language. So if you're sitting back, arms folded, kind of dazing off, I can call you out on that. So I apologize that I'm not there to make everybody uncomfortable, but we communicate all the time, and we have to understand how our body language communicates. I think I shared with you before when, again, coming back off active duty into the hospice team in Oregon, I did a lot of shoulder shrug, like, you got a problem, go fix it yourself kind of stuff. And my partner was able to say, hey, your body language kind of sucks right now. You need to be able to communicate better with these people who have more than one emotion. Which, you guys got a much better me than before. So I have two emotions. So the other part is when you're communicating, the words that you're saying mean the same thing to the person that they're being sent to. So there's the sender, the receiver, and the communications, what happens in between, and it's different. Regardless if you say the same words to two people, both of them are going to get something out of that. So words alone won't provide the meaning, and it's the interpretation of those words that are the actual communication. So we have to make sure that, honestly, as a social worker is much better at this than I am, but saying, this is what I said, this is what I meant to say, what did you understand? And being able to walk through those to make sure that the right things are said. Verbal communication is primary. That's not accurate. Your nonverbal communication is your primary source of communication. So if you're sitting in a classroom, your arms are folded, your head's back, you're not really interested, right? Or if you're leaning forward right now, your arms are up on the table and you're actively engaged in what's going on, then I could say you're probably paying attention and you are interested in what's happening. But it doesn't matter. You didn't say anything. Your body is telling me everything I need to know. One of the patients yesterday with Alzheimer's disease, the wife was fiddling with her fingers, her foot was tapping, and she wasn't saying anything. And so I was talking about how her husband knows when she is anxious, when she is nervous, when she's frustrated, regardless of what she says. And so I pointed out, I was like, I can tell right now that you don't like this conversation. I can tell right now that I've pushed you further than you're comfortable because of X, Y, and Z. She didn't say anything, but her body language is telling me that she was really ready to be done with this conversation because it was taking her out of her comfort zone. And so those types of things you have to pay attention to. You have to pay attention to not only your body, to the patient's body language. More importantly, you need to pay attention to what you're communicating with your body language, because that's what matters. Perfect one. So I was at a nursing home with a social worker, and I'll be honest with you, it was hands down the worst communication technique that I have ever seen from any human being, let alone a social worker who spent 8 years learning how to communicate with people. So she was helping me on rounds, interviewing this patient. She stood behind the patient and she had to talk loud because it's hard of hearing, but didn't touch him, just started talking and saying, expressing the issue and then saying, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to be doing? That was the extent of her communication. And he's like, go away, I don't want to talk to you. And she threw her hands up and walked out the door. And I'm like, well, I would have said the same thing. That was terrible. So I went around, and the guy's neck is his back is kyphotic. He's kind of looking down in his wheelchair. So I sat down on the floor where I could look up at him and he could look down at me. And he laughed. He's like, what are you doing? I was like, well, we're talking. He's like, okay, what do you want to talk about? And so being able to change the environment to be a better communicator is the most vital thing that you can learn as a hospice team member. You have to get down on their level. You have to, better yet, if you can get below their level, that shows a level of respect to that person that allows them the control, and you're showing respect for them. So you think about it, if you're playing with a new puppy, right? They're going to get down below your level to show that you're in charge. Same thing. We're all humans, we're all animals at some point. We show that level of respect by our body language. Communication is always a two-way activity, and there's this thing of can't give too much information. There is a point where there is too much information, and I reached out yesterday with one of my families. They were done, and so I had to be able to adjust to, well, let's follow up next week and let's see how these techniques work so we can try some more next week. So know when too much is too much. We had a patient 2 nights ago with Melissa, and Melissa's a very friendly person, so she loves to talk. But this family did not want to talk to people other than the daughter and the granddaughter that were in the room. They were talking. They didn't want anybody else in their space. And she picked up on that real quick when she was asking questions. She's like, okay, we're a quiet family. And so she was able to shut down her communication and just sit and be that presence, which is all they really wanted. So we got to know when too much is too much. I've never found skirting around the edges to be effective way of communicating. You have to be honest. People want to know the truth. And sometimes as a hospice nurse, you're going to be the first one that tells them the actual truth. They're going to be, well, my doctor told me that I have 6 months or less to live. But in the note, they're like, this guy's got 2 or 3 weeks. And so it's like, I'm sorry this didn't get communicated to you, but this is going on. This and this is what I see. We probably have 2 or 3 weeks left, and we need to get ready for that. So that honesty is hard, but we have to be able to be comfortable in those hard, honest conversations. So there was a survey that was done on families that were going through life-limiting illnesses. And the things that came out of that was the healthcare provider will be honest and truthful, will not abandon me, you will elicit and request their values, goals, and help as much as possible to achieve these, assist in exploring realistic options, work with the entire interdisciplinary team that they understand the plan. And then the biggest thing with double exclamation marks was listen. That's what families want. They want you to listen. They want you to hear. They want to tell their story. They want to make sure that they tell you everything that they can. All right. So this is where we get into the verbal and nonverbal. So 80% of communication is nonverbal communication. So you look at your body language, your eye contact, your gestures, your voice intonation, and your physical comfort zone. So each one of us, let's start on the backside, your physical comfort zone. Where are you comfortable in talking to somebody? Some people got to be right up in your face. And for most, I found that most people going through a terminal illness, that's not where their comfort zone is. It's a good social distance kind of communication. I shared last week of Sabrina going in and giving a patient a hug. I love that stuff. And then she backed off to a point where she could communicate effectively with them and that happened to be across the table. But she made that initial broach and touch, and then backed off to where she could communicate. Um, for this other family 2 nights ago with Melissa, when I was there with them, it was me actually sitting in the bathroom around the corner where they couldn't really see me, but they knew I was there. And they were having a great conversation between mother and daughter about their dad and grandpa. And it's one of those beautiful things to listen to as they reminisce about life, but they didn't want me part of that. And so I kind of removed myself from the situation. And so that was their comfort zone. I moved back, and they were allowed to openly grieve. When you look at your voice intonation, it is amazing what you can do when you need to calm a room down. So if I need to calm a room down, I'm going to drop the tone of my voice. I'm going to slow down my rate, and I'm going to make them have to struggle to hear what I'm saying and struggle to hear what I'm trying to get across. For the most part, that is where I talk to families. I'm a much lower tone. I want to make sure that I'm not adding to a chaotic situation. If you got people screaming and yelling in the room, you got to be that voice of calm. And that voice of calm is slow, steady rate, slow, steady tone. That allows everybody else to focus on you as the person that's like, okay, I'm going to ground myself in that. And that's how I'm going to be more effective in this chaotic situation. So you cannot be the person that's running around with your hair on fire when you walk into a patient who just happens to be uncomfortable. This patient from Monday, Casey was there for 3 or 4 hours trying to get him comfortable. It took me another 4 hours plus a morphine pump to get him in a place where he was comfortable. And then there was lots of secretion. So we actually had him up completely on his side in a fetal position. And that was the only way that his airway was working. And for 5 hours, he became comfortable before he passed. And so in that time, the family couldn't see any one of our hospice team being, holy cow, I don't know what I'm going to do. It was always, okay, that didn't work. Let's try this. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try this. That position's not quite right. Let's move him over. But at no time were we like, holy cow, I don't know what I'm going to do. And for some of you, it's, let me step out. Let me give the doc a call. But it's always calm, comfortable. I got this. We're going to be okay. Your gestures, it can be, lots of people like to talk with their hands. Some people don't at all. And you just got to, I like to match what I'm seeing. So if I see somebody with lots of hands, I'm going to use my hands a little bit more. If I see somebody who's sitting on their hands, I'm not going to be out in their face with the jazz hands trying to communicate with them. It's going to be, I'm going to try to match what they're giving me so that we can communicate with each other. Good eye contact. The amount of eye contact that a hospice nurse, a hospice social worker, a hospice chaplain, or CNA can provide to the family directly relates to their success in taking care of that patient. Poor eye contact, to me, is the number one indicator that somebody who does hospice isn't going to do well. If you can't make eye contact with me when we're talking, you surely can't make eye contact with a patient's family. And that aspect of a team member has been proven over and over again over 20 years. Eye contact is the most prominent indicator that somebody's going to be successful in hospice. And then body language. We talked about folding the arms. We talked about leaning forward, being engaged in what's going on. All those things come into play when you could not say anything, but just be actively listening to the family, and they're going to put on your review of, it was so wonderful. They gave me so information. They listened so well. I just knew that they were there to take care of me. And that was 100% body language, nothing what was said. So make sure that your body language is purposeful. And all these things, you can't just speak words. You have to be purposeful in your communication, and that is 80% body language, how you act, how you behave, where you're sitting. Are you sitting above them? Are you standing over them? Or are you sitting down below their level? Those things make a difference. So be conscious in that. So when I'm having a hard conversation with families, I'm always saying, how much do you want to know? Especially when we talk about the last few days of life, because the patient, I don't know about you guys, but all the time I'll get questions from the patient saying, what is my last few days going to look like? Am I going to be in pain? Am I going to be short of breath? And so, you take their disease process and say, this is what it could look like. This is what I hope it looks like with the right medications. But if it does look rough, we're going to be here for you. We're going to be here to help you. And so I found over and over that people want more, not less. And some families they're going to shut you off and be like, I'm good without knowing that. I just want to make sure that you're here to take care of them. Got it. We'll take care of that. When we're looking at bringing the whole family together, it's important for us to initiate family meetings, not wait for the family to do that. And so this is where we get all the players involved, and we sit down and we say, okay, who's doing what and how are we doing it, and who's in charge, so we can make sure that we don't have that cousin from Kansas that comes in again and blows up our whole plan of care because some reason they disagreed with us and they weren't there at the start. We can solve those problems with family meetings. It's interesting as you look at different types of illnesses. You kind of get a theme of illnesses that strengthen the patient, strengthen the family, and other ones that weaken it. It's interesting. I've never met a woman that has gone through breast cancer, or those cancers that go on. I've never met one that wasn't the absolute best person I've ever met. And I think sometimes of going through that refiner's fire of, I've been through a lot and now I'm just here for my family. Hands down, the women that I've had the privilege of taking care of that have fought breast cancer, best human beings I've ever met. And that situation, that family situation always goes better. Where you look at, acute situations or chaotic families and again, no family is normal. So especially mine. So this chaos sometimes will exacerbate. We've seen that just in just this week, where a daughter was trying to accuse the granddaughter of kidnapping when the patient wanted to move to California. So chaos will bring chaos, and it will get worse. Make sure that we know what those family relations are, and that's why it's so important that our social workers and chaplain get that life review so we can get a picture of what we may be needing to deal with. From a children's perspective, make sure that we're communicating at that child's level. I think recently, I think when you our kiddo out in CUNA, I watched Katie communicate with that child in a beautiful way. And we had to do things that hurt him because he had these wounds from the prednisone. But as hard as it was for Katie, she communicated in a way that he could understand. And it was just awesome to watch. It was just a natural thing, right? I don't know that Katie's been trained on how to communicate with an 8-year-old kid who was going through cancer, but she just naturally, she was able to do that for him. And it was awesome to have her part of the team in that situation because she made the difference there. And it's awesome that our CNAs can make, at the time she was a CNA, now she's, going to be a nurse, but it's awesome how our CNAs can be the one to make the difference, regardless of the situation. And that situation, I was the nurse, Brandon was the social worker, and JD was the chaplain, but we relied on Katie to take care of the kid. So all those things are important, and why we have a team. So our cultural considerations, again, sexual orientation, religion, age, ethnicity, gender. We talked last week about the culture of making sure that, we don't have the problem as much with same-sex marriage now that, they can be power of attorneys in all states. They can be the family in all states. We don't have the same problems that I had before, where that person's chosen spouse can be there for them at the end. It's a good thing. The religion, we talked about that, different ethnic backgrounds, age, obviously, and then gender, and then all these play into one thing if you have the person that has differences from their family. The other thing to consider when you're looking at this is, what is their past experience with hospice or healthcare? What is their socioeconomic status? Is their language primary or secondary to yours? And then we learned last week is their country of origin. Brittany mentioned that her grandparents had a elementary level school of education, so even with her, when she's talking, she has to be able to communicate with them differently. And I never thought about that before, because I come from an area of the country that not well educated, but it's important to learn from each other. I never would have thought of that until Brittany said it. My friends, when I first started in healthcare, helped me from the sexual orientation piece, that I was able to understand a new culture and be a better person because of that. So all those things are important. So our listening steps, hearing, understanding, retaining that information is usually where we break down, right? Analyzing and evaluating, and then helping others activate and empathize. When you look at, oh, sorry, I'm getting a little feedback, Jesse. So when you look at this, I look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So to me, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs for communication. Are we doing the basic thing? Can we hear? Next step, do we understand what we hear? Next step, can we retain that information? And then can we evaluate it and implement it, and then hopefully help other people? So those types of things are important, just like Maslow's. Attentive listening. I don't know if you guys have ever been in a room with just chaplains and social workers. I love watching all of the active listening that's going on. You can see head nods, and if everybody turns and look at Drew right now, I can tell you that he's nodding his head probably. It's amazing that throughout their training, that active listening piece is the most important part of what they learn. So if you ever get a chance to sit and watch some chaplains and social workers talking to each other, you will see some awesome active listening skills. I don't know, do we have a chaplain or social worker up by the mic, Jesse?
Yeah, Drew. Yeah.
Hey, Drew.
You just had the entire time you were talking to.
Drew, could you talk a little bit about what active listening is to you?
A lot of it you already described. The nonverbal piece is huge. And I think a term that I remember our chaplain, Tim, mentioned one time when he first started that really impacted me is the ministry of presence. And that to me is what does your presence communicate to other people? And being engaged, showing with your body that you are engaged. So obviously with your comment, that has become pretty ingrained in me. I nod my head unconsciously to show that I'm listening, and eye contact is huge. And as you're describing, matching people in the room, as you were saying, I think that's really important to be able to see what other people's communication style is and matching them in that, so that that provides comfortability. If you're the sore thumb in the room that's standing out, then that's going to make everybody feel really uncomfortable. I think another element of communication is when, at least for myself, when I do talk, I choose carefully when to talk, and I try to choose words that are going to affirm a person and help them feel more comfortable, help them feel known and heard and understood, especially in situations where people are very uncomfortable with hospice, especially the word hospice and what that means to them. And for them to feel validated, and showing that in our physical presence and with our words, to listen and affirm their concerns, I think is really important. So yeah, those are a lot of things with active listening that I consciously engage in when I'm with patients and with families.
Awesome. Thank you. Is there a social worker by you, Jesse?
Can you hear me, Lenny?
I can. Can you move a little closer?
All right, we gotta shuffle some people. Like Drew, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I have actually a specific question for you, Shannon.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I know you guys are taught this in your schooling. What techniques do you guys use to avoid misunderstandings?
Well, I was actually just gonna talk about this when it comes to active listening, because you did describe a lot of the pieces of it, but one that I was thinking about was the idea of asking good questions. And that is gonna entail some of those open-ended questions and some of those ones that sound like, can you help me to understand where you're at so that we can meet them there? Because that's the most important piece, is meeting them where they're at and being okay with not having a solution to every problem in that one conversation. So I think it's okay to revisit. I think it's okay for people to say, you know what, I'm going to come back maybe a couple of days after this conversation. We're going to talk again, and I'm going to bring my other team members maybe that could help me also to do that.
Can you talk about clarifying questions?
Sure. I think in conversations I've had with nurses about communication and how to be more effective in that, I've kind of given some phrasing to use. And a piece of that is to say, can you help me to understand this, your perspective on this? Can you tell me what concerns you have with using those medications? Can you explain a little bit more or say more about your feelings about end of life? So those are some of the phrasings that we can use to try to better understand where people are coming from.
Perfect, thank you. When you're trying to give advice to people, and this is where you can come off either cold-hearted or you're the best person since sliced bread. So when you're giving advice, do so unassumingly. So have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Or something like a friend of mine once tried this, or hey, this worked for this patient. Have you thought about this? Those types of things can be really helpful. You're asking the question, you want them to get to a place, but you're not doing it in a way that you're directly challenging their thought process. You're allowing them to get all in line with you. We talked about reminiscing, and then you look a lot at I don't know what your guys' thought are on creating legacies. We talked about how the Warhawk Museum is doing that for World War II stuff. I have in my bag, I think I may have shared this with some of you, but I have this in my bag. I don't know if you can see this. It's a crochet hook, and it's my mom's crochet hook. The night she died, I was cleaning up her room because my brothers weren't in the state of mind that they could do it. And as I moved the table, her bedside table, to move it away, so that the funeral home could come in, there was this blue crochet hook that was just sitting there. And sorry, wrong time to share the story when I'm sitting in a car in the middle of Nampa. And that hook was one that my mom had always, she taught me how to crochet. So when things were really bad at my house, she and I would crochet. And it's funny, I remember one year we did a lot of blankets together. And then later on, I found a HR review from trying to go through and do her obituary. And I shared this with Brandon, but she was a rock star at work that year. Like she accomplished so many things, but when she got home, she could barely sit up. There was so much pain and depression and crap, but at work she was on. And I don't think anybody ever knew what she was going through, and I never knew what she was doing at work. And so being able to see the crochet hook, that reminds me that I need to make sure that I'm always doing the job that my mom would be proud of. And so when you create that legacy in your family, as a team, as making sure that the person that's sitting next to you would be proud of what you did every time you interacted with a patient, that's creating a legacy as a team. And then together, we can create that legacy of always doing the things that either our team members would be proud of, our parents would be proud of, that we do the job that is going to make a difference. And that's how we can create that legacy. And I'm sorry I went off on a tangent there, but felt like it needed to be said. So presence. We talk about therapeutic presence all the time. Drew just alluded to it. Being there is the most important thing that we can do for those families. We don't always have to have the right answers. For this guy that Casey and Melissa and I took care of on Monday, I'm not sure I had the right answer at any given time. This is the one time I can think of where more morphine was the right answer. But it was through the pump. And what was cool is when I got that pump, Jesse was the one that brought it to me. Sherry went out and grabbed the suction because this guy he had pulmonary edema and it was foaming. And Sherry went and grabbed the suction for me because the DME company was going to take too long. And so it was cool that throughout, and then while I was there, the social workers calling saying, "Hey, you guys okay? Can I do anything for you?" It was just awesome to see the entire team come together. And even though this Miley, the CNA, brought me some extra gloves and some extra wipes. And it was cool that in that last 12 hours of life for that patient, there was so much hospice presence that I'm not even sure the family noticed, but I definitely noticed it. And you guys were all there supporting that family, supporting that patient at that time. So awesome to see. And so when we talk about presence, it was important for me to be in that room and be quiet, just like it was for Melissa at that time to be in that room and be quiet. But everything else was running and going all around us. But we were able to maintain that peaceful presence inside the room. Um, so when you look at acknowledging your own vulnerabilities, like with Melissa, she likes to be very outgoing and friendly, and she's comfortable in talking in challenging situations. I'm not. Um, so knowing who you are, what you're comfortable with, and knowing at times when you need to push yourself into a different situation is very important. So acknowledge where your weaknesses are and being able to move those forward. Um, Knowing the other person's important, having that connection, affirmation and valuing, acknowledging their vulnerabilities, utilizing your own intuition. You talk about reading a room. Have you guys ever met somebody who just cannot read a room? You look at, Travis was also part of that team on Monday, but if you look at Travis, I don't know if he's in the room. He may not look like he's paying attention at all, but that's just his body language. I know he's paying attention. Um, it is it is awesome to see a combat vet with zero training other than experience, and then being married to a social worker, that obviously helps, but being able to walk into a room, and at times I've seen him take over the entire situation. There was a patient death with Carl and I. When Travis got there, that's when everything was okay. But Carl and I are doing all this medical stuff, but Travis was the one that made it okay because he was able to walk in. He knew the family. He had been there visiting with them, and he controlled the room, and he controlled the rest of that he controlled the rest of that night until we got the veteran into the van. It was awesome to see. And that's another thing. We got to be a team. We got to be able to rely and act and help each other when we need it. Let's see. There's so serenity of silence. For some people that's hard, for some people it's easy, but when you look at presence, for me, I look at silence as well. When you can be present and silent and know what they need when you're there, but not have to ask and not need to tell them what they need. You're just there giving it to them. The granddaughter of this patient happened to be an internal medicine physician. And so she was the one that wanted to clear the secretions from the mouth. So she's doing it. And I'm sitting there like a surgeon assistant opening these little toothettes and handing it to her. And we did that probably for 2 hours. And that was her way of taking care of her grandpa, but I was still there supporting her as we were going. When we got the suction machine there, she wanted to be the one to suction, but I was holding the water so she could clear the line, and I was wiping it off so she could use it again in a few minutes. So I didn't have to say anything. She didn't have to ask anything because I knew what she needed. But it was kind of cool to watch her do her thing to take care of her grandpa. And then I was just there as an assistant for 4 or 5 hours. It was an awesome experience to be a part of.
Hey, this is Drew. Can I add a little something to that part about presence?
Sure, please.
All those aspects that you mentioned and you had on the slide, I think an important part for us as clinicians in order to provide presence, you're talking about our own inner work, and you've described a couple examples for yourself in getting into hospice and your own inner work and perceptions of people and cultures. And it's so important for us to provide empathy and presence for us to be doing our own inner work so that we can be comfortable in those situations when we step into them and provide genuine empathy. And that really requires us looking at ourselves, and when it's hard for us to be with vulnerability in a situation, to look at what is keeping us from being able to be comfortable with vulnerability. On Monday during our stand-up meeting, I mentioned something about we can only be with a person in their pain to the degree that we've entered into our own pain. And there's something about that where for us to be genuinely present to a person and not feel uncomfortable, we need to look at ourselves in that to provide genuine presence.
Awesome. Thank you. And so, we're coming up on the 1 hour mark. So I'm going to leave with two things. One is I'm just going to reemphasize it is so important that you guys set the right atmosphere in the room. On the last section, we'll talk about that death plan. How can we set up the room to, one, be clean, to smell good, soft music, right? We set the right atmosphere. In the room as in general, and then we set the right atmosphere in our communication with them. And I talked about making sure that we get down below their level, but always at their level or below. I like sitting on the floor a lot because I think I hope that it shows a respect that is different than what they've seen before. And to that, the patient with the social worker that was completely wrong, he got a kick out of me sitting on his dirty floor. But I was able to talk to him eye to eye because his eyes were pointing down. So make sure that we set that environment and we intentionally make ourselves in a position where we're not threatening and we are providing comfort to that patient. We talked a little bit about a family that wanted to talk and a family that didn't want to talk. Attentive listening is the most important thing that you guys can do. You can't be distracted by your next patient. You can't be distracted by the patient that didn't necessarily go the way it was supposed to the 5 minutes before. You gotta turn all that off, sit and be with the person that's in front of you. If that is vital to you being able to be successful. I'm gonna fast forward here to, oh, it's just a picture. Okay, so when we look at, there's something called the SPIKES protocol, SPIKES. And so the S is setting. So the environmental setting, and then your listening skills. P is perception. What is the patient's perception of that condition or seriousness? CJ admitted one of my guys, and I went out to his house last Tuesday or Wednesday, and pure liver failure. Guy's yellow, got his veins on his stomach. I'm like, you should have been in the hospital 3 days ago, man. What are you doing? And he's like, well, and he has agoraphobia, so he didn't want to go. And I was like, I get it. We either need to go to the hospital right now, or you need to go to or you need to go on hospice, because there's only one way this ends if you don't go to the hospital. Turns out the hospital couldn't do anything for him, but at least we had that assessment. His perception of what was going on was completely wrong. And so I was blunt with him. I was like, you are dying soon if we don't get to the hospital. And sometimes I have to use that to wake people up. It's like, there's not another choice here and I can't do anything to stop it. So we need to do something else. So we need to understand the perception of their illness and condition. There's going to be times where you look for that invitation. The I is the invitation from the patient to give information. And sometimes I have to say, how much information do you want regarding this? What do you want me to tell you about this? And some will say, I want to know everything. And some will say, just give me the highlights. But then I can share that information that they want. And is knowledge, how much medical knowledge do I have? And how can I portray that medical knowledge in a way that the family understands and that they hear? Because again, it's not what I say, it's what they hear, is the communication that happens. Explore emotions, empathize as the patient responds. So being able to be empathetic and explore some of those emotions. I'm not as good as one of our chaplains and social workers, and that's why we have a team, right? Nurses can't be everything. We have to be able to allow the people who are professionals sometimes to explore those things. And then a strategy. So the spikes, the S part, is have a strategy when you walk into the room. some of you are experienced enough to walk into any room and handle any situation. I would say that after 20 years, I still plan most of my communication with my patients. If I know what's going on, I want to make sure that I say the right thing at the right time. And so I'll plan ahead as I'm driving to the next house or driving to the next facility. And I know that there's a difficult conversation coming. I'm going to play through those things in my head to make sure that I have a strategy on how to communicate things effectively. And as you're building your skill set, as you're building your knowledge in hospice and palliative care and nursing and social work chaplaincy as a CNA, as you're building that, plan it first. And then when you get thrown into a situation that makes no sense to nobody, you can then say, okay, in my mind, this worked here and let's do this. And so you can be that calm voice because you have the experience of, well, if that didn't work, let's try this. If that didn't work, we're going to try this. And we're going to keep doing things until we find the one that works. And we're never out of tricks. We're never out of tools. We're never out of options to be a better hospice team for that patient. We got resources galore. We have some of the best physicians in the Valley. We have the best hospice team in the Valley. And we have a clinician like Brandon controlling the budget. So you have everything you need to take perfect care of these hospice patients. So I'm going to end there, or 9:31. Is there any questions or closing thoughts from anybody?
I don't think so.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I apologize for getting where I was supposed to be this morning. We will chat later with you. We'll post this video on YouTube. And for anybody that looks like we had some people join late, so this video will be available once I get it over to Abby. So have a great day, everybody. We'll talk.
Thank you, Lenny.
Thank you.